Hello, everyone. Welcome to the web conference, Holistic Mobile App Privacy Risk Prevention, Dynamic and Static App Scanning. This web conference is brought to you by the IAPP and Privado. My name is Zachary Foote, Programming and Speaker Coordinator here at the IAPP, and I'll be your host for today's program. We'll be getting started in just a moment, but before we do, a few program details. Participating in today's web conference will automatically provide IAPP certified privacy professionals who are the named registrants with 1 CPE credit. I also want to let you know that a recording of this program will be available in your My IAPP portal, located under My Purchases and then My Recordings within 48 hours. Now, on to our program. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, CEO and co-founder of Privado, Vaibhav.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for the introduction. I'm really excited to talk and kickstart the webinar. So as we know, today's topic is about mobile app and specifically all the upcoming privacy risks, especially on the regulatory side. There has been a lot of focus by both the European regulators and regulators in US, specifically the California AG, FTC, and maybe some news coming in from SDK, specifically from Texas as well. As a start, quick introduction about myself. I'm Vaibhav. I'm the founder and CEO of Privado.ai. Prior to starting Privado, I was actually involved in product management, working in a company that had a mobile app with, I think, 50 million monthly active users. So pretty big, pretty huge. My journey into privacy actually started in because we were trying to become GDPR compliant. And I was kind of that middleman, that one translation layer between our legal team and our engineers. And one of the questions that our legal team had was, hey, give us a list of all third parties that are integrated in our app. And, I thought that was a very easy question to answer for our engineers. And I asked them, can you not just search and get that? And they're like, so many people have been involved in building this app. Nobody really knows. And so that's why I started Privado, to make this gap that exists between privacy folks, product engineering folks easier, and use automation and scanning to do the same. As we go through the webinar, I'm sure there might be some slides that open up some thoughts or conversations or questions. There is a Q&A button at the bottom. Feel free to put your question there. If something is super pressing and related, I will actually take that. But we also have a dedicated Q&A section towards the end. So we will have about 10 to 15 minutes. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn. You can connect with me and separately also discuss. With that, today's agenda, we will focus on a few things. We will actually take a slight detour and quickly discuss a state of website privacy. And why website privacy? Because it's kind of linked to mobile app. It's one of the main digital experiences that your end customers, your end users are experiencing. And I would say whatever we're seeing in website kind of ties the story for mobile app. Mobile app is a more kind of more non-compliant version of a website. That's kind of how we look at it. And the second thing, we'll focus on what the regulatory trends are, what the enforcement trends are, specifically in US and Europe. We'll look at some of the recent fines, some kind of news items related to mobile app. Again, the main conversation is not to pick on any specific company. It is basically to learn from what the regulators are looking from a perspective of mobile app, what the end customers are looking from a perspective of mobile app privacy, what the conversations are on Reddit. And then finally, giving you a quick overview of how you can use Privado to actually comply with all these upcoming requirements. How can you, achieve mobile app privacy without slowing down your app development team and, be confident about what you're saying. So I think I'm a big Parks and Rec fan, and specifically Ron Swanson. And this kind of episode really was, I found it very funny as someone working in privacy, specifically when he looks at what cookies are, and then the famous scene afterwards. But the state of website privacy, which is a report that Privado released recently, kind of reminded me of this sequence from Parks and Rec. And specifically, the reason were some of the findings. So when we did this research, one of our key goals with the research was for a privacy team, there are very little metrics around benchmarks around, hey, how many third parties are integrated in a website? Is my cookie banner working? How many pixels? How many scripts? Like there are no benchmarks and those KPIs are hard to get. So our goal was to figure out, hey, what's the state of website privacy as we finish 2024? And then our hope was we prepared the same report every year and things improve. So yeah, I mean some findings that were actually pretty uh, interesting. Like we thought Europe will be much better from a privacy perspective, but when it comes to websites and specifically consent, 76% of the websites, if visited, top 100 websites visited from US, specifically California, do not honor CPRA opt-out or GPC signals. Um, since we have done the report, there have been more jurisdictions, more states who have put in the same opt-out global signal requirement. So I'm sure if we do it across states, the number might be closer to 90 now. In Europe, where the banner has to be there and you have to have a reject button, things like that, 74% of the websites did not honor either a reject button or a no action, right? So you go to a website, you take no action on the banner, still cookies get dropped, or you reject the cookies and still cookies get dropped. Now, violation wise, 69 in US, 23 in Europe. So the main insight that we got from the website privacy that we're seeing in the mobile app pretty soon is in all both the scenarios in for these top 100 websites, all of them had a banner or a do not sell or share link. They actually were blocking a lot of scripts as well, a lot of cookies as well. So if you look at from a privacy perspective, the privacy team worked a ton, the marketing team worked a ton, the web development team worked a ton, the consent team worked a ton. Everyone worked and actually made the website compliant at some point of time. And with time, what really happened was the website became non-compliant. And the reason, the number one reason we saw was Google Tag Manager. So a lot of scripts were being sent through Google Tag Manager. Someone changed the configuration there, didn't tell the privacy team. Or, there was one mega script that were loading too many scripts and that was not possible to block it. The main thing is like as privacy team, you actually put in the energy, made the website compliant, sacrificed the revenue for privacy, but then the website became non-compliant. So you're not doing I mean, at the end of the day, the job is still not done. The revenue is sacrificed and you're still not compliant. So that's one of the main surprising things for me. And that's why we feel like you need to have like a web scanning solution, which is different from a CMP. CMP can help you say, hey, here's a banner. We've done the initial scan, but you need a process around the consent platform for your website. You need a process which is running a scan to say, is your CMP working? If someone in your CMP team decides that the reject button should have a different color than the accept button, can you validate that without opening your website every day? If a user rejects the banner and cookies are still dropping, do you know that automatically? Can you run the scans from different locations? Because depending on location, things can change. And the last big piece is data leaks. A lot of fines in the US, and specifically, I think the few ones in Europe, which I remember, are the pharmacies which got fined and the banks which got fined because of data leak to Metapixel or the conversion API of Meta. Those flows you can actually discover from website scanning and make sure, and that has nothing to do with consent. It's mostly to do with as a user, when I search for a disease or a medicine on a pharmacy website, is that data going to TikTok and Meta, or is that data staying within your company? Because your privacy policy will say health data will not be shared, but in reality, the way your analytics will get set up, marketing team, analytics team don't have that context. They will take all the data to these pixels, and that's been a common area of concern and breach as well. So just wrapping up the website scanning piece, websites like mobile app have a lot of non-compliance. A lot of that has to be done, is related with the banners being misconfigured. And the second biggest risk is data leaking to these pixels. You can prevent both of them through web scanning. We have a product for that. Feel free to reach out to us. Um, the next thing, basically, or shifting gears to mobile app. Why have this conversation today? Why have this conversation in January of 2025? We see a trend both in Europe and US, specifically from regulators, where mobile app scrutiny is increasing a lot. I mean, you can go as back as 2021 from an FTC perspective, or 2023 and even 2024, where SEPA lawsuits were kind of coming in. I think there was one very recently for, I think, like weather channel or a weather company, and there was something related to a meditation app, and some SDKs. Um, then of course, like there's been a new FTC rules around COPA. On the European side, specifically the French regulator has been super active. They had, I think, last year published a very detailed guidance that was in French on what mobile app publishers and developers have to do. We've actually have converted that into a nice blog post that anyone can see as well. Um, Second. Yeah, one more thing that I found interesting, and thanks to IPP for their analysis, was this new COPA update that has come up. Um, I think one of the interesting thing there was in the disclosure. It's not about naming the categories of third parties. It's about listing all third parties receiving children's personal data. um, Material change, I think that's still up for debate or questions, and getting consent specifically for advertising whenever sharing is happening, right? So three key requirements that have come up from the new FTC update. So if you are in the children space, like if your app targeted or it's kind of a mixed targeting children, then actually you need to have a real list of all third parties where your children data could be shared. And one of the key areas from where this could happen is your mobile app. And a lot of decisions of what third party gets integrated in a mobile app is down to the end engineer, to the end mobile app developer. And it's very tough for privacy teams to figure that out, right? So I would say, yeah, like this is a big change. Getting that accurate list is very important. So that's why we're speaking about mobile app privacy today. Um, Next, I think CNIL, and this is, I think, maybe a few days back, January 21. I think that's the date. So yeah, it's Monday probably or Tuesday. This is super recent. They've come up with two, or this year, I think they've come up with two guidance. So that's on the Europe side, but any US company focusing on Europe, they would pretty much be required to comply with this. Um, I'd like to call this like similar to how KYC exists, like KYS, know your SDKs. Uh, Specifically because CNIL or the French regulator sees this as a very big risk, and they're basically calling off saying, hey, if you're an app publisher, we know your developer. They try to, I think, in their guidance say app publisher and developer, but for most people who are on the join the panel, they are a company, and which is the publisher, and the developers are employees. It's not like a different entity. Sometimes it could be there, but most cases. So you're kind of responsible to know each SDK you have, figure out what data processing happens through these SDK, which means what data gets shared, what data the SDK collects automatically without you knowing, and also like making sure the SDK honors these consent, right? Um, One of the main things I want to highlight why SDKs are being targeted a lot is because SDK is like a pre-packaged code. It's not a big thing if you work on the product side, but from a privacy perspective, they get a lot of privileges. So for example, if your app takes location permission, once the app has location permissions, SDKs have the same permission, right? So they can piggyback on the app's permission to actually take location data from your app, right? So let's say you took location data because you needed it, but now the same location data is available for your SDKs as well, right? Same is for notification, same is for device, all of that, right? So that's why like SDKs tend to be looked very seriously by regulators, because there have been cases where you could have like a malware ad SDK, which the only job was to like harvest data and then sell it to, maybe the government or wherever, they were selling it, or to some threat actors as well. So how do you comply, like get that live SDK inventory, uh, identify data flows to SDK is very, very important. On the legal side, making sure you have a contract with each SDK, parent company, having the third-party risk management, and you need to have a proactive SDK review process, right? If someone adds an SDK, before they add an SDK, you should know, and then you should have this entire process, and hopefully more proactive and more not manual. Next, so this is like again on the mobile app French guidance, which is around permissions. Again, permissions, specifically, I think this is more to do with like how permissions can be thought of, that you're already taking consent. And the French regulator kind of like separated the two and gave guidance around like, hey, the app requires, or the Play Store or the app developer requires you to take permissions or for location data, but you need a different consent if you want to use it for advertising, right? So that was I think for people working in privacy, yeah, this was expected, but for maybe for app developers, this is something new. Um, yeah, so like having that basically list of what permissions you have, what data you collect, is there any piggybacking happening? Is the same location permission used to send data to advertisers and things like that becomes very important, right? And there are real harms. So I think there's one big case around how RTB is used to take location data or IP data to then further, basically figure out the location of the user and then build a profile, right? So these are all these real life concerns that we've seen. And that's why permissions, SDKs, default data collection, data sharing becomes a big concern for regulators. Um, all right. So yeah, again, like the goal is not to pick on any company, but the main thing that we're seeing is it's a long trend of like enforcement by different regulators. The reasons might be slightly different, but yeah, I think one trend FTC always uses is, hey, you say something in your privacy policy, if the reality does not match, then that is something, becomes a violation. And then especially health data, location data is super important. On the kind of like the California side, it was again like COPA or child data. And then SEPA claims are interesting because they're not driven by regulators but by litigants. And yeah, I want to make sure, like as I give you the demo as well, like it's actually websites are very easy to audit, so there are more claims on websites. Mobile apps are a little tougher to audit, but it is possible. You can audit any mobile app on in present in the world. And yeah, specifically, the French regulator has said they're going to do a mobile app sweep. And I know the same technology or similar technology is being used by the American regulators or AGs as well. And they've done that in the past also. So yeah, I mean, from a regulatory perspective, they are very technology forward in doing these sweeps and audits. On the website, actually, the tooling is pretty out there. On the app, it's a little still not that out there in terms of if any normal person can do, but people can hire technological companies or auditing companies to actually do it. So it's not impossible. It's just that the bar is a little higher, but regulators are going to do that. As far as I can do as far as I've read their guidance and those things, right? So that's a little bit about why, right? Like the enforcement, the regulator trend, and like you can see it's like a perfect storm, right? Like the app stores have their requirements in terms of manifest and nutrition reports, and that really troubles the end app developer because their app gets blocked. The regulators are doing sweeps and scans and 2025 with the SDKs and data harvesting and location data sharing. And then finally, like litigants, right? Litigants are also doing the same. They're like targeting apps and figuring out, hey, you have this SDK which collects all data, and that's like you're snooping, or so that's like another front that opens up, right? So at the end of the day, like from if you're working in privacy and you have like your company which publishes one, two app, or hundreds of app, you need a way to actually have a clear view for each app. What is my app doing? What data does it collect? Who does it share with? What are my SDKs? What are my permissions? Is my consent working? Am I leaking data? All those things you need a way, and something which is automatic, always running on your behalf. And breaking down like some of the risks that we've seen on mobile app, and we'll go into a little bit of some real life examples. Over collection, I think that's number one. One of the recent finds have been around where driving habits, location data, telemetry data was collected and then shared to data brokers. So I think the first thing is like, are you collecting more data than required? Uh, Number one things to think about is automatic data collection, right? Uh, you could like, there are permissions where you could even get keyboard strokes, full contact history, clickstream data, battery information, phone, model information, network information. All these things are available to be automatically collected. From an end user perspective, the main risk is, would your user, if you put that in a privacy policy, would you get like a LinkedIn post from your user, or I don't know, like a Twitter post that you are a spying company, right? I think that's the risk from a trust perspective that I like to think. But overcollection is one big risk. In the overcollection, persistent identifiers are another big risk. Like specifically these, like in advertising, they call them MAD IDs, mobile ad IDs, or device IDs. Especially if you link it with the IP or location data, it actually becomes like a toxic set of combination, because with these persistent identifier, you can identify the user across the mobile app ecosystem. And then if you have IP address, you can get course location. If you actually have precise location, then you can profile pretty much wherever they went. So I would say like over collection, one big risk, something to find, something to figure out. Second, I would say, of course, on the first party collection, like things that you're doing, persistent identifier, children data, like if you have children, then that is also something that you have to figure out, especially like, is the age gate working, right? Maybe someone set it up, but it's set up wrong. Some SDKs fire even before you do an age gate. If that happens, then basically you're sharing device data, ad data, these identifiers with SDKs before you take the age gate test, right? So if you are dealing with children data, like testing your age gate becomes very important. And then there are third party risk. I think that's the biggest risk, or the reason for fines and enforcement and all the guidance, right? Few things that you can see. One is like having, I mean, first of all, once you get the SDK list of your app, there could be like some SDKs what could be malware as well. So that happens less now, uh, but it is possible. So there could be some SDKs which could be risky from a perspective of your own company. So for example, if there are SDKs provided uh, by developers, or where the host country is something which is not suitable for the jurisdiction, they're not maybe compliant, or you require extra work before data can be sent to that country, that could be one risk. Like there have been instances where there were actually SDKs which were being given for putting ads and monetizing for apps, but they were pretty much malware. They were like harvesting data and then selling to further to defense and government and military. So that's definitely there. So the first thing is like third party sharing risk. One is like, what's the SDK landscape? Like what is the third party landscape of your mobile app? Like that itself creates a bunch of risk. The second I see, like number one, before even consent kicks in, is this piggybacking on permissions. All these SDKs can piggyback on your mobile app's permission, right? So let's imagine you are a delivery company, right? So you are like delivering food or grocery, and people can buy on your mobile app. You of course need the permission of location for figuring out where you are, so you can see the restaurants nearby, things like that. The moment you get the precise location permission, the SDKs also can piggyback on that and take the location data also. So that's one risk that exists, right? So I would say like, what is the data that your SDKs get automatically is a big risk, especially on third party ecosystem. On the first party side, yeah, there's the risk you collected, and maybe you get breached, or you're over collecting, you're not giving transparency. But for third party, the risk is even higher, because they can then use it further. The second risk I see is insufficient consent. So if you are in Europe, then of course e-privacy applies, then GDPR applies. So combination of those two, so which means you might have a banner. And then if as a user I say reject in some version, would your uh, basically would your SDK still fire? We see that all the time. Right? And sometimes you can see, like, I know there's a question about like SDKs and cookies also. Are they related? But I would say like scripts and SDKs are very, very, very uh, uh, similar, right? Like scripts on a website, or the parallel of scripts on a website or pixels on a website is SDK. And cookies is different. Cookies is the data that gets stored on the computer. In case of mobile app, less data gets stored on the phone. They can just take the data automatically and then just send it outside. So I would say like the real comparison is SDK to scripts. And there is some equivalent of cookies, but yeah, it's mostly like persistent identifiers which get shared, and you don't need to actually store it on the mobile app. it just remains the same, right? So if you have a mobile app, it has a if you have a mobile phone, it has like a specific ID. So once you have that ID for to a third party, you don't need something, a persistent cookie to track the user across website. You just have that ID. You can just track it across like a data broker as well. If I have the ID of my phone, I can do that. Um, Next, so yeah, I think finally, also like if you have advertisements on your mobile app, you also bring in fourth party risk. So you have an SDK which has an SDK which could have another SDK. So that chaining exists. And if you have children data, like specifically testing your age gate becomes important. Uh, yeah, so how do you solve it real quickly? Like Privado has a solution for that. And specifically, the way you do that, or the way Privado does it, Privado is a product privacy management tool. So think of a company which builds all these digital experiences through website, mobile app, a lot of APIs that support it, or marketing tools that are used to give your consumer nice experiences. We scan all of that, and we do that to get data maps, identifying risk proactively, and then, auto-generating these regulatory reports. We're going to focus on mobile app specifically and go from there. So mobile app from a solutioning perspective, how does Privado help? So we scan your mobile app holistically. There are two ways you can scan a mobile app. One is source code scanning or static scanning. One is dynamic scanning. So if you think of your mobile app as like a maze, and so source code scanning is you are actually taking the printout of the maze in a 2D format, and you have the way to look at all the pathways to go from point A to B, right? And you're looking at the business logic of the mobile app and saying, let's figure out all third parties, let's figure out all possible data flows. So that's basically source code scanning or static code scanning. Um, Dynamic scanning is different. Dynamic scanning is where you say, I don't care about the code, I care about the final app. What I'm going to do is I'm going to literally test the mobile app, open it up, and then run some custom test journey. So I know my mobile app is a dating app. I'm going to check for if I search for a user, if I favorite a user, if I chat with the user, if I put my sexual preferences, if I put my health status, where does that data flow? Or if I'm a pharmacy app, I'm going to search for a disease, I'm going to search for a medicine, I'm going to add that in a cart, I'm going to make a payment. What happens with that, right? So that's basically dynamic scanning. The main thing is once you have these two things, you actually get a few things unlocked. First of all, you get that third party SDK list, you get all user permissions, all SDKs, you figure out which SDK fire on what consent action. You can identify every third party data sharing that's happening, and you get this full journey of what's happening on my app, pre-login, post-login, during checkout, when I search for or based on a disease, when I put my sexual preferences, whatever your app is supposed to do that. Um, Next, you then prevent accidental data sharing. Why do we call it accidental at Privado? Because a lot of time it is accidental. The thing is, the product analytics marketing team do not know the privacy context, and the privacy teams don't have that detail of how the app is built. So you do a best case scenario and you put these assurances on your website under your privacy policy. We will never share health data with any third party, because that's that's what was communicated, but in reality that health data was leaking. So you start preventing those accidental data sharing because you have the data flow maps, you know the data cross-border data flows, and you know exactly where sensitive data leak is happening, so you can fix that. Consent testing. So while you could have a CMP, Privado actually does CMP testing, which means you can run tests to figure out, hey, before my banner loads, what happens if as a user we're rejecting the consent on the banner, are we still firing third parties or not? Things like that. Um, yeah, and then finally, I think a big piece for the on the French side specifically is, or even in US, has been the SDKs. So having a audit trail of all the SDKs that are integrated, or in the future, if they integrated, getting an alert is what you get from Privado. So think about like, hey, what's there today that will make you compliant? And then the main thing is having that programmatic, something like almost like a bot which is running on your behalf, and saying, hey, whenever someone adds a new SDK to my app, I'm going to get alerted as a privacy person. And then from there, I can actually go in and, make sure the SDK is approved, and then only, we can, the other team can actually add that. All right, perfect. That brings in to the demo part. I know there have been some questions. Uh, so there's one question around the cookie and SDK, which I answered. Um, and then there's another question around how would a company comply with a data deletion request across these third parties to whom the device ID has been shared. So I think the biggest risk is, so the second thing is, of course, the operation work of data deletion. But actually the first risk as a privacy team is, have you made the disclosure, right? So do you actually know the third party? So if you don't even know where all the device ID has been shared to which third party, that itself is actually a problem. You should have had the contract in the first place. And then if your app is actually on the falls under the children on the COPA side, then actually now you need the list of the third party. So uh, if you don't have the correct list, then that's COPA violation. So I would say the data deletion is a secondary part that can be done. Like once you have the inventory, then the main thing is you as a business have to make sure that you have that uh, DPA in place. And if it's a controller to controller relationship, then also in that case, you will have something in terms of forwarding or data deletion request also. Um, so yeah, that answers the question. And we will move to demo. All right, perfect. So we are going to look at mobile apps specifically and jump from there. So as I told you, there are two ways that you can scan mobile app in Privado. You can scan mobile app through dynamic scan, which simply means record a user's journey and then see what happens, or you can scan the source code, which is nothing but the actual logic of how the app was supposed to be built. So we're going to start with mobile app scan. That's the number one entry point. So I have a few apps that generally people have played in the past and are pretty or pretty favorite. And then, again, not picking any specific company or app. This is just educational from that perspective. So if anyone has played solitaire in their past on desktops, I have played on PC. They also have a mobile app version. So we've uploaded something called an APK, which is available, which means anyone can on the internet can find that for your app also. Once you have that, you upload it on Privado, and you get first of all, you get a list of all permissions, which is the first part, right? The French regulators guidance is you need to know what permissions you have and what data gets collected. So for example, for the solitaire, these are all the permissions that this app takes. And then you can see if it takes location permission or ads permission, you can start to correlate. So luckily, no location permission, the risk is relatively low. The next thing is third parties. So you want to know what SDKs are in the app. So these are all the SDKs that are in the app. This is all done just by uploading the APK so far. We haven't run any test. But for example, this app has Facebook SDK. You can see com.facebook ads audience network activity. This is nothing but the actual name of the SDK. So we have the Facebook SDK, we have the Xander SDK, we have the Liftoff mobile SDK, you have the category. Uh, you'll also start to see hosting locations and some more details as we actually run the test, but we already know this specific app has advertising SDKs, Firebase, which is the Google SDK, Google Play SDK, Xbox SDK, things like that. Once we have that, that's when the fun part actually starts. As privacy team, the biggest problem I faced, or I generally, when I talk to privacy professional is, hey, I have to ask the app developer, and sometimes they tell us what they do with a certain app, what the SDKs are. Just by uploading the APK, you already know the permissions, you already know the third parties, you already know the SDKs. Uh, yeah, and great question, Mallet. Like, how do you categorize SDKs if they have multiple categories? So we will actually do that. You will see we also have subcategories, but we don't have. We like to do. We don't bundle. Like Facebook has Facebook ad and Facebook login. So if there is Facebook login, you will see Facebook login. You won't see Facebook. There are 20 SDKs all under Facebook. You will see them just like product wise. So that's how basically you can actually You can actually see different categories of SDKs. It's actually not clubbed. And then, of course, like you can assign more SDK or more categories to SDKs as well. So yeah, so far what I've done is as a privacy professional, just uploaded an APK, got all this nice information, but the fun part doesn't stop here. The fun part is to actually say, hey, I'm going to test my app and see what happens. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run the test from California and say, hey, as my user plays solitaire, what happens? Does the data get shared externally? What's really happening, right? So we're going to run a small test in the interest of time and see what happens, right? So of course there's a consent banner. You can decline, accept. I'm going to accept, uh, and then kind of move on. So I accepted the banner, and then you can see that like the full app has opened up, right? So it's pretty much the how the solitaire app is supposed to be. And then again, as a privacy professional, you will know what your app is supposed to do. This app is supposed to be where you play the game. But if you have a dating app, you might want to add sexualities, put the location, search for other users, try to send them a message, try to favorite them, try to swipe them. If you are a pharmacy app, you want to search for a disease or a drug, and then um, basically put it into the drug in the cart, do the actual payment and see what happens, right? So one level of testing you can do is with the banner which opened up at the start and say, hey, is the banner working or not? But other type of testing you can so is like literally just play the game, right? You can like spend 20 minutes or whatever. That's up to you. Once you do that, you can see on the side, we have all these actions being recorded. This is being recorded because next time we can actually just do a scan using the same actions you took. So you don't have to repeat the test all the time. Um, that's it. So we've recorded a test. I'm going to say save test. Yes. See if the yes button was clicked. And that's it. Basically, all we've done is we've recorded the test. And then from now here, what will happen is Privado will start scanning and then populate the result. So just to give you context, what was really happening as I was clicking all these buttons and playing the solitaire game, we actually were getting all the data of all the third parties which were being fired, right? Any data that was being sent out from the mobile app, we were getting that. It's called network traffic, basically nothing but the actual data flows from the mobile app. And we were getting all of that. As we were getting all of that, what we are now doing is we're saying, okay, convert that into a list of third parties, data flows, and violations. We already have the result for that. So instead of like playing around, we can actually look at that. I can also give you some more example. This is another fish, very actually pretty addictive game, survival fish. I actually enjoy testing it. So this has 13 permissions. Again, does not have a location permission. It has a bunch of SDKs, so you can see like a lot of SDKs relative to the other one. But yeah, so this is like your app could be something similar like that. But we're going to look at the results. So look at a solitaire result. Let's look at data elements. So first of all, what data did the app collect? Collected basically two data elements. Number one is unique IDs. Number two is device info. We can start from here. Basically, user agent, which has a bunch of information like um, the phone name, the phone build, things like that, is being shared with three third parties: Microsoft, causalgames.com, ads Microsoft, and Firebase. The second thing is unique ID. Again, this has a bunch of unique identifier, and that's being shared with two third parties also. So that's like a super simple way. We record a test and you start to see where data flows. You can also see it from a different angle, which is like see the list of third parties, and from here you can see it. Um, we'll take another example really quickly, which is this game which I tested, which was Survival Fish. Had more data. You can start by saying, okay, it says something like child specific information. So essentially COPA, which is a variable, which is something which was being shared related to COPA, which is basically nothing but COPA false value was being shared with Facebook, which is fine. Let's see, device information that's being shared with some third parties, unique ID, so a bunch of unique identifiers being shared as well. So that's how the dynamic scanner work. Essentially, think about it as you're going to run some custom user journey to figure out, hey, what third parties are firing. For a child app, it could be age gate testing, consent testing, cart testing, things like that. The flip side to that is static scanning, where you don't need to do any of that. We run the source code scan It's fully automatic. And here's an health app example. You see the similar things, but early. So this, think of that as live. Think of this has not been live. It's still, you're still developing. You start with the same view, which is like all the SDKs, and then you can go into a list of data elements that this mobile app processes. In this case, location, device ID, IoT data, things like that. And then you can see, like in this case, illness or medical condition is being shared with Firebase and Facebook. You get a list of all the SDKs, Mixpanel, Firebase, and then for any of that, you actually see what data is being shared also. One final thing, you also will see issues. Anytime health data, sensitive data is being shared out, Privado will convert that into an issue. Now, why is this important? When you're actually trying to fix things, reduce risk on your mobile app, you want this list of risks saying, hey, we know we've leaked medical data to Facebook. We want to fix it. How do you do that? You create a Jira ticket from Privado, and for your engineer who does not understand the legal stuff, does they understand code, they will see this nice box which says, hey, we started with this thing called therapy taken that we are collecting, and that gets transformed in code. And finally, here is where it gets leaked to Facebook. And please remove this line so we are compliant. You don't have to do all of this translation. Privado does it for you. And the main insight here is you go from a place where you do not have any visibility on data flows to a point where you have a list of privacy risks or privacy issues that your engineer can look at. They have a line by line proof. They can actually fix it as well. So that's the exciting part about Privado. If tomorrow I add another SDK to my mobile app, we will again create an alert for the legal team, for the privacy teams, and the engineer and the product team saying, hey, you have added these SDKs to your mobile app, and we have to approve it before you can do it, right? So think about Privado, where you first get to see a list of all SDKs, who owns that SDK, which third party, you get to see the location, you get to see what data is being shared, are there any cross-border flows, data flows, issues. So you're very compliant, right? So you go from very little visibility to complete complete visibility, and like, yeah, we can be ahead of the regulators. And basically, I think like the intention is always to be compliant, but of course the risk is that you don't really have good visibility, you're relying on people, there is no evidence. So you go from like trusting people, which generally doesn't work because it's human memory at the end of the day. I also feel with all this co-pilot generated code, like at the end of the day, like you can, the trust is on trusting people to tell you what is the right information is actually a bad strategy, because even they don't know that. So that's another problem. So that's kind of what Privado will do for your company. If you have mobile apps, if you have websites as well, but if you have mobile app, you can try our solution. We actually, anyone who's on the webinar, we are offering to send you a free mobile app scan report that would help you become compliant as well. You can you can just leave that note on our website. We have a page for that. Or yeah, you can also contact me on LinkedIn, and that would help your company to become compliant as well. So that's how the mobile app scanning work. And as we were chatting, you can see the other scan finished as well. I played the game a little bit more. You can see there's some more data which got collected in the second test, right? So depending on how deep the test is configured, you can collect more data or less data. So yeah, it's pretty real time, right? It's not like you have to spend months. In 15 minutes you get the data. So that's about the Privado demo. I'm going to actually move to Q&A and open up the floor. So if you've had questions, right now is the right time. I'm going to take all of those and answer uh, best. Yeah, so great question, John. Yes, absolutely. So again, for source code scanning, that's of course the crown jewel of companies. We have contracts, DPAs in place with our customers, and we are SOC 2 compliant. So yeah, you can be comfortable in uploading that. On the web and app scanning, which is the dynamic part which I showed, basically that is publicly available information. Pretty much anyone in the world can do that scan. And regulators are actively doing it. So yeah, even that is kind of covered under our DPAs and NDAs and MSAs. But yeah, yeah, I mean, that part is available. Like, and whoever can, if a user can access your app and website, anyone can scan that. So, let me answer the next few question. So the question is this primary for website app developers or end users too? How about a government agency? Thanks for the question. It's basically for, I would say it's even less for developers, it's for the privacy team. So I mean, in fact, yeah, most of our customers are privacy teams. They're sophisticated enough in the sense that they've put in some efforts and they want to make the app compliant, right? That's the main question. And how can they do that? So yeah, it's for the privacy teams who want to make the website compliant but are struggling because they don't know if the banner is working, or the mobile app, they don't know the SDKs. It's targeted, like all our products are targeted to companies. We actually don't sell to any government organizations. Our main user is privacy officers. We want to help make their life easier, not make their life difficult. Um, Okay, another question. Can Privado help in understanding if your cookie banner works fine? Thanks for asking that question. Absolutely. In fact, we have a demo website called privacydarkpatterns.com. It's super simple. Let me open that. Yeah, it's a website where basically the cookie banner doesn't work. It has misconfiguration, and you can see Privado has detected a bunch of privacy issues. I've scanned it from Germany, wherein if a user takes no action, there are cookies being dropped, for example, from TikTok, and pixels are being fired like Google Ads. So Privado has like a full proof of like, hey, this is what's going wrong in Google Tag Manager. You have misconfigured a tag. Please fix it. So yes, to answer your question, absolutely, you can use Privado to audit and then monitor if the banner is continuing to work or not. That's, yeah, a lot of companies have used Privado for that. And the same is true for mobile apps. So it's not just web scanning, it's app scanning as well. Let me go to the next few questions. By the way, thanks for asking all these questions. Um, yeah, so the question really is like, which of the data protection principles did you recognize so far as the most demanding to be implemented in the app design process? I think privacy by design, data minimization, these two are really tough. Data minimization, let me start with data minimization because a lot of data in mobile apps can be collected through automatically, like, right? So think about like how data gets collected. It's like the user fills in the form, which you can see, right, as a, if you're using the app like a privacy professional. But there is this observed data which comes from the device. Nobody knows what that data is. So that can happen through the, like, your app developers can do it, the SDKs do it a lot. So data minimization, you need to first know what data you're collecting. That's a big problem. Second is privacy by design. Privacy teams do not have visibility into what the app developers are doing. And you need something which works at the speed of engineers. Engineers are pushing code every day, and then privacy reviews happens once a year, so that they're not like at the same pace, and that becomes a challenge. So how do you make something which is a scanner, which is scanning the work, not asking people? It's like it's going to scan the code or the app that the developer developed, and then stop it and say, okay, you're making a substantial change, it requires a privacy by design review, and then only you can go ahead. These are the two I feel are more difficult. The consent part, for example, a lot of apps have it. Making the consent work is a different story, but these two I think fundamentally are really, really tough. Um, all right. What should be the ideal frequency of carrying out these tests? Great question again. I think the ideal frequency is dependent on your app release frequency. Generally, people release an app every 2 weeks, and that happens. So that's a good, every 2 weeks is a good frequency. For website, we recommend weekly scans, bare minimum monthly scans, but weekly scans, because there are a lot of platforms where you can change configuration and you need to know at least weekly. You can also do daily, but I think weekly itself does a lot of concerns. Are the data flows limited to websites and mobile app, or is there a broader use case? Thanks for asking that question. The way I like to think about privacy is like you need to mature, and mature by risk, right? I think the biggest risk is on your front end, user facing properties, mobile app, website. First, figure out the data flows from mobile apps and website, but actually a lot of data, sorry for being a little technical, like how people say is client side or server side, which means it doesn't happen on user's browser or phone, which is client. It happens on server, which is something that you don't see. So you first start with something which is user facing, mobile app and website. But if for privacy team, you will have to move to the backend, which nobody sees, which is the server side sharing. And that is something you need to scan also. You can do that with Privado. We have a solution for that. But I would say I would recommend like start with the web and app at least, because that's where the litigants are focused. That's where the regulator is scanning. Anyone in the world can scan. Like we scan few things again from a perspective of helping everyone and figure that out. This question around data protection, the Indian Privacy Act, DPDP Act, and yeah, I think for DPDP Act, I mean, especially for DPDP Act, it's very complex because the main legal basis is consent. So any data flow from your mobile app or website needs to be clubbed for a consent, and then you need to block it or not block it. So the first thing is getting the foundation, which is the data flow map, that ground level source of truth. So what I would suggest and kind of working with the Indian customers is scan the mobile app and website, get all the flows and auto club them with purposes. And then you have the map. And then now some of that will require consent. Maybe some of them could work with the legitimate, which is not that broadly defined, but yeah, at least you'll have something to do with that. Another great question, can the scan detect if the website or app has the required privacy notices? Yes, we have a customer who scans their website in particularly to make sure they have the privacy policy link, applicant privacy policy link, the Washington My Health My Data link, and I think it's another one, your privacy choices or do not share or shell link. So yeah, you can actually do that. Make sure whatever links needs to be there on each page exist as well. So you can do that also. Thanks for asking that question too. All right, so there's some great set of questions. Yeah, there's one more that I saw earlier, which was regarding the RTB breach or RTB data leak that happened. Basically, the question was around like location data was being harvested from the bidding servers. Basically, so if you are a publisher which has ads on the mobile app, then kind of you can like share data, and then other publishers can come in as well. So as a app developer, the main thing you want to know is like if an advertiser is getting persistent identifier and IP or location data. If that's the case, then that would be something you would want to like audit and prevent. Yeah, our product works across geographies, so for sure the Canadian market, it works for that. Yeah, that's for the PIPDA as well. Hey Zach, I see you're back and unmuted. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah. I mean, if we had a few more questions, we absolutely have a few more minutes. We could take a few more questions. I thought I would just jump in as we are getting ready to wrap up, but we've had a lot of great questions, so it's always nice. But yeah, if anybody has any questions while we have a few more minutes, feel free to put them in the Q&A. Also, I put a survey link in the chat for everyone to take a look at. A very brief survey that will help us with our future WebCon programming if you would like to share some of your feedback with us. If there isn't any more Q&A, I do, of course, want to thank Vaibhav for sharing his valuable knowledge with us today. And a big thank you, of course, to Privado for sponsoring today's webinar, enabling it to be free to all of our attendees. I also want to thank all of you for joining us. And it looks like, yeah, no more questions. So that wraps up the program here today. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope to see you again at another IAPP web conference soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.